Now, there are two reader-based methods that colleges typically employ. One I call just the two-reader model, and the second is the community-based evaluation model. Is there a better reading method? I think I'm not sure. And for colleges, I don't think that they know either. Both present their ups and downs and their challenges. So I'm going to speak about both. So with the two-reader model, what is that? Typically, a two-reader model is where someone is reading your application, your territory manager, by themselves, right? They read it front to back all the way, and then they send it, to review, and then probably the dean gets it. They review that application as well, and they send it over to a second read. And then the second reader comes in and they read the first reader's read and their notes, and they read the application and they add anything that's additional information. They go in and double check, that they recorded all the academic information correctly, the rec letters, that they caught everything in the rec letters that are really important, all that kind of stuff, right? And then they send it to a final read, and that read then goes to committee. What is community-based evaluation? Community-based evaluation takes hold in a different form depending on the institution. And so originally it was, created by the University of Pennsylvania, and then I think really strongly reformed by Swarthmore College. But looking at this, the way it's traditionally used is that someone reads the academics by themselves, and someone reads the kind of extracurricular and everything's outside the academics by themselves, right? And so these two people are actually in the same room, or they're on Zoom reading together, right? And so someone is reading the academics and sharing all about the academics with the person next to them. But again, they are the only person on that academic side, right? They're reading the academics. And then a person who is reading the extracurricular activities, they are reading those extracurricular activities and anything else that doesn't have to do with academics by themselves as well. And so then they're having a conversation and they are streamlining decisions, right? And so they're either going to send a student into like committee, they're going to do a student, they're going to deny a student. But what they're doing essentially is splitting the application in half. So typically, when you are in a two-reader model and you're reading by yourself, you're finishing application anywhere between, 17 to 30 minutes. And then if you're in a committee-based evaluation method, you're typically spending about anywhere between 4 to 6 minutes on the application, because you basically cut the application in half. And you're actually verbally sharing what you are seeing with the person across the camera from you, or across the room from you, as you read and evaluate these students, right? So there's not much notes taken. Which one is better? It sounds like the first read, the two-reader model, is better, but not necessarily. Why is that? So I read applications, and it was my favorite part of the job, actually. I really loved reading college applications. It was just, reading season was really daunting. Reading season is from like December-ish all the way until, mid-February. And all you do is read applications. I would get up, grab my laptop from across the bed, put it into my lap, start reading, go to the gym, come back, start reading, eat breakfast, read more, probably take a nap, get lunch, read more, and read more. We had a review about anywhere between 20 to 27 files a day. And then that's if you were pretty speedy. And so, keep that in mind. So like when you are reading an application in a two-reader model, you might get someone who's really tired. You receive their application at 1 p.m. and that's not the time where you are at your best, and you did not give that kid a fair read, or you're extremely exhausted, and it's the first thing in the morning, this is your first application, and you're a little rusty, and you're reading this application, again, when you're just tired and worn out, or maybe you're upset, or that person's having a bad day. Like, all those applications were not read well. That's why you had those checks and balances of a two-reader model, but you don't know. Sometimes if you're as a second reader, you might get two bad reads because that person you also maybe got them on a bad day, or they're tired, or they're exhausted. And so, yes, I think that, two-reader model is very thorough, and does allow for someone, to come in and, try to check for those people having, maybe like a bad read or a bad day, because reading season is exhausting, but it just depends. And then with the community-based evaluation, what's nice is that typically these people aren't exhausted because they're not reading for 14, 15 hours a day. They're reading for about 8 hours a day because they're able to get through so many applications, with each other, in this model, because again, each application is taking about 4 to 7 minutes to read, depending on the application, and they're not taking as many notes, and so you're not going to get people who are tired, who are exhausted, people who are going to be able to read your application thoroughly. But at times, right, there's something to be said about having the whole context of the application in your mind, so you can able to understand everything. Like, yes, like you're hearing things from your counterpart who you're committee-based reading with, but it's not the same as reading the entire application. There's something to be said about having someone who has read your entire application from front to back, regardless if they had a bad day or not. And so, both methods aren't perfect. Typically, we say that the first method, the two-reader model method, is for the students, and the community-based evaluation method is for the admissions officers. Both are equally important in this process. It just depends, right? Because again, you want, if you're a college, you want admissions officers to come back and not, dread reading season. That's important. But also, you want to make sure you are reading the kids in the best possible way, in the best possible light. So there is definitely a check, and there's definitely a balance here. As we progress in the slide, committee is so important. Now, there are different committee methods, and so it's really important, I think, when you're in an information session with the college, ask how they read. Be like, hey, I'm just kind of curious, how do you read? Do you read in a committee? Do you read by yourselves? How do you read? That's a perfectly fair question. People are like, oh, you can ask that. I'm like, of course. There's nothing to hide, right? Because it's your decision, it's your application. You should know and understand how it's read. That's incredibly important. And so when we're looking at a committee, it's also fair to ask, people how the committee is done. And committees can take shape and hold in different ways. And so with the committee process, it's important to keep in mind that no student will know if they're in committee or not. That's just how it is, because the process is the process. Some kids will go to a committee even if they're not viable for admission. Some kids won't. It's just really going to depend on the institution in and of itself. So there are committees where basically what happens is this. A typical committee has either, most of the office or the entire office, in committee. And then, you have an admissions officer prepping their applications, and then presenting the applications. They're presenting each kid, right? So they're reading the pros or their summaries of the students' applications in front of, the other admissions officers. And typically the person who's a second reader to the file is also in the committee room. And so what does that mean? What does that mean, right? And so typically after someone has finished their pros or finished their presentation on a student, there's discussion, right? There's any clarifying questions that other admissions officers have. There are discussions and about the candidacy of the admissions officer, if they have a hook, how important this student is to the tennis team or the basketball team or to the orchestra, or to our dance program, or to our physics program or our computer science program. Like, what is the importance of this child in the context of our school's institutional priorities? They're talking about these things, and so after the discussion is done, there's a vote. Typically majority vote, the student is in. Anything else, the student is either waitlisted or denied. And so, again, the vote is what it is, and committee is so intense. I think it's important to remember that if you put your best foot forward in your application, know that someone is fighting for you, that someone is advocating for you. I can't tell you how many times I've yelled, I've cried, I've laughed, I've, so many emotions I felt in committee at, Haverford when I'm advocating for a student who just wrote the best possible application. And I really, really, really enjoyed that application. I really loved it. Oftentimes I knew that it was going to be a stretch if we took them, but I still fought for that student, so advocated for that student very hard. There are students who've been denied. They'll never know that I truly did love their application. Their application was arguably one of the most moving applications I've ever read. I still remember those students that I denied. I still remember some of the students that I waitlisted, not just the admits, but I remember all my students. And so just keep in mind, if you are writing your best possible application, that someone is fighting for you and advocating for you very strongly, and you might not get in, and that's okay. Just know that someone really does care about it. And so if you're putting your best foot forward in the application, do not worry. Like, someone is going to take care of you. There are real people, really, really, really wonderful people. And I know it doesn't feel like that, but really wonderful people who are out there advocating for you, fighting for you, wanting you to come to that college. I truly, truly, truly mean that. I'm talking to a great friend from Tufts in about an hour. And JT Duck, Dean of Admission, he's incredible. And I met him at Swarthmore College, and he really vibed with that as well. They did community-based evaluation, and I was at Haverford, and we did, single, basically two reader model, two reading methods. And it didn't matter what method it was, regardless, I think that we had both agreed upon that, like, when students write a wonderful application, that how can you not advocate for them? How can you not continue to fight for them? And it's just so, so, so important. Now, when we're talking about committee, there are different committees in different rounds, right? And so I'm going to jump to the decision rounds really quick and understand this is that different rounds, there are different levels of viability per round, right? So what are the rounds, right? So there are different ways you can apply it to a college, right? So you can apply early action to a college if they have early action or restricted early action. Typically, restricted early action is Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and I'm forgetting one, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and Princeton. And then you have early decision. Most schools have early decision. You have early decision 2. And sometimes even like a hidden early decision 3, or sometimes an early decision 0. What does that mean? It means that there's an early decision 0 that is rolling, right? And so you can find out about that early decision before even the early decision 1 deadline for other schools. What is early decision 3? It's informally called early decision 3, but it's early decision 2, right? It's just you can apply early decision 2 to that school even after you've heard back from your early decision 2 school, right? And so, those are some things you'll have to work with a counselor who's pretty, with it, understands the methods and the modes of different colleges to figure out what that actually means. But keep in mind that, and then there's regular decision, and then there's, the waitlist rounds. But, keep in mind that, yes, there are different, admit rates depending on the round you apply. With early decision, that is the easiest way to get into any college. It doesn't matter what college it is. That is where students have the highest admit rate. And so you have to keep in mind, I remember I was working with one of my students, Leo, and we were navigating whether or not we wanted to apply to Columbia early decision or Williams early decision. And, me and his family, we were on a call for about 2 hours trying to decide whether or not we want to do Williams or Columbia. And he wanted to do set design, which is really exciting. People are like, oh yeah, Columbia, obviously, but not necessarily, because Williams is actually incredible when it comes to set design and whatnot. And so, with that being said, we went back and forth. But one of the things that stood out was that Williams College, their early decision applications are 800 applicants, right? And their regular decision applications, so they only have early decision and regular decision. Their regular decision applicants are like what? It was something like 17,000. I could be wrong on that number, but it's somewhere up there, very, very high. And then when we were looking at Columbia's early decision, like their early decision is 5,000 students, and the regular decision applicants were like 45,000 students, right? And so both are excellent colleges, some of the best colleges in the country, and we went up, we ultimately went with Williams because, that's where he decided that he felt like he would be best at. But also, it was really important to keep in mind those numbers, right? Like that's huge. Like to be an applicant in 1 in 800 students versus, 1 in 17,000 students, that is a big difference, right? And there's typically colleges are filling up about half their class in early decision, right? So basically, if you have a class of 356 students, right, and you're taking 175 of them in early decision out of a pool of 800, and then taking the other 100 and something students, out of a pool of 17,000 kids, that's a big difference in your likelihood of admit, to that institution. So you want to keep that in mind. And this is where we get into the enrollment strategy versus preference. Enrollment strategy, what is that? Is strategizing your ability to, or just basically strategizing your application to be admitted at an institution. Major does matter when you apply to, bigger schools, or even smaller schools like liberal arts colleges versus, a bigger school like UT Austin. For example, I know that this past cycle, if you were a computer science major and you were a boy, like that was one of the most ridiculous application pools to be in the last cycle. I had not seen so many applicants, boys, who were just absolutely crushed in the admissions process when they indicated computer science as a major. Same thing with business. It was just so hard because there are so many boys out there who want to do computer science, who want to major in business. And I've seen it, like students who apply to the same school, who apply to different majors, like the student who had typically the student who had like a major that wasn't as popular was the student who got in, even if they weren't as good of a student. There are many students who got into, schools like UT Austin and USC, who were not as good of students as others. It was just their major selection, right? Everyone wants to do business. Everyone, wants to do computer science. You want to take a look at the gender of the major you're applying to. How many people are applying? Typically, boys who apply to liberal arts schools or liberal arts colleges, like the School of Liberal Arts at UT Austin or the School of Arts and Sciences, or a liberal arts college. Typically, that's going to be more female heavy, and so they're going to favor boys more, right? Because again, they want to value to some extent a gender ratio or gender balance. Not always, not to the extent of the quality of the class, but typically that is something that's going to be mindful and really important, because there are certain majors that are going to be female dominated, and sometimes to see a boy who's interested in, I don't know, education, or who wants to teach lower elementary school is interesting, because when you think about this, how many male teachers did you have as a lower elementary school student? Not many. I didn't have one. I had one male teacher, and there were like three male teachers at my entire elementary school, right? And so to see a boy, for example, in that context is great. And on the reverse side of things, let's say you are a girl who really loves engineering, who loves math and science. Well, that's a male dominant field, right? So maybe, interestingly enough, like, oh, like, I was thinking about math, but maybe I will apply to the engineering school, because you might have a better chance of being admitted than to the School of Arts and Sciences, because that is girl dominant and girl heavy. So some things to keep in mind as you're kind of navigating this process. How you apply matters, how you apply with your major, what decision round you apply with, and the way that institution is conducting their reads in the communities, all of that matters. So please, please, please keep that in mind.